Hello again. Are you part of a team that is delivering an education training or assessment program and are looking for ways to use assessment resources more effectively and more efficiently? Well, in that case, in this video, I explain the concept of sequential assessment in a longitudinal program or a program of shorter duration that allows for repeated testing within the time interval of the program using a single case design approach. My name is Jimmy Lepping. I'm a psychologist and statistician with an interest in a wide range of research topics, including education, assessment, and learning. And in the next few minutes, I use an example of 3 candidates who are enrolled in a 3-year health professions education program, in which every 2 months there is a practical station in which each candidate is assessed on a series of key competencies, and that assessment results in a score, which I explain in a minute. And at the end of the 3-year program, a decision is made about each candidate regarding whether the candidate A can progress to the next level without an exam, B needs to do an exam in order for the team to come to a progression decision, or C needs to do a repeat year without even having the chance to go into an exam. This approach is made possible because single case design methodology is about collecting time series of data on performance or other variables of interest at the level of the individual candidate over time. And this way, not only the performance of a cohort of candidates can be assessed, but equally, and at the end of the day, more importantly, decisions about the competence of individual candidates, which is to say current or future healthcare professionals, can be made. In the Innovation Center at which I am currently based, the Virtual Hospital Valdecilla in Santander in the north of Spain, we use single case design methodology in some research projects in which we track the development of relations between people in the healthcare system over time, or for instance, the decision making of professionals in complex clinical cases using different types of technology. But I have in some publications in the course of the last few years also advocated for its use in sequential assessment of the competence of students, residents, and professionals enrolled in educational programs. So here you see the first of 3 hypothetical candidates of this example. Each of 18 stations results in a performance rating that can range from 0 to 20, with 20 being the best score and 10 being the minimum passing score, or I prefer the term borderline here, just at 50%, just enough, perhaps with a few minor lapses that in a real clinical situation would normally have no serious implications for patient care. You see that this candidate in general performs above or well above the minimum standard of 10 points or 50%, with the exception of just one occasion in the first year. The second candidate clearly performs worse than the first candidate, and in this case there are only 4 occasions of acceptable performance, meaning 16 cases of performance below or well below the standard. And the third candidate is somewhere in between the first and second candidate, with a mix of performance at, below, and above the standard, fluctuating around that 10 points or 50% line. Now, there are several ways to statistically model these data, and I have publications on each of them if they are of interest. The first model, which you see here, is a period linear time series model, which is becoming more common in single case designs, which we also use here at Virtual Hospital Valdecilla, with quantitative outcomes, and that models the time series, the serial correlation in the data through either a first order autoregressive or a first order moving average component. If you want more details on these components, I have publications on these, as well as a worked example in another video on single case designs on my channel. In this model, each year can have its own trend, and our interest lies in calculating the 90% confidence interval around the end point of the best fitting regression line for each candidate, which is to say at the end of year 3 in this picture. Why the 90% and not the 95% interval is explained in much more detail in my publications as well as in a few videos on this channel. But in short, it is because we will effectively use this interval for one-sided testing if the interval is above 10 for cases such as candidate 1 in green, or if the interval is below 10 for cases such as candidate 2 in red. A related model which treats the serial correlation the same way as the model we just saw with an autoregressive or moving average component, but only accounts for a general time trend across the 3 years. This need not be a linear trend. Can be a curvilinear trend, for instance, a quadratic trend where growth over time is concerned, such as in some settings where knowledge progress testing is used as part of an assessment program where there is clear growth over the years. But the key is here that the time trend is general instead of year specific. Next, another way is calculating here the average of the 18 stations, which is like an ordinary least squares regression model with just an intercept, and calculate the 90% confidence interval around that intercept, around that average, which will be slightly different than the 90% confidence intervals we get from the previous two models, as we will also see in a minute applied to each of the candidates. And finally, especially in settings where performance can swing quite a bit and or extreme cases are observed, or we consider the ratings not of a quantitative type but more ordinal categorical. So in that case, these cases, linear modeling or simple average calculation would be tricky. But even in those cases, well, one can use a non-parametric model called PANT-B. This model can be applied for any type of variable, also for quantitative scores. Although in quantitative scores I would use it as a complement to the models that we just saw. Well, so-called PANT-B, or the Bayesian binomial model of the percentage of all non-overlapping data. I have a separate video on PANT-B on this channel, but in this case it basically comes down to counting the number of cases for a given candidate that are below standard, and these cases constitute the percentage of overlap. In the case of consistent performance at or above standard, the non-overlap with that lower zone is 100%. Here it is about 94%. And while PANT-B combines these counts of 17 successes and 1 failure with a default prior of 1 success and 1 failure to calculate a 95% credible interval, which is the Bayesian counterpart of the confidence interval, to in this case check if this interval includes or excludes 0.5 or 50%, which is the standard here. For candidate 1, the result of these 4 models is the following. PANT-B, we get a 95% credible interval completely above 0.5 or 50%, meaning we have sufficient information to conclude that the level of competence of this candidate is probably well above 0.5 or 50%. And in the sequential setup proposed here, this means no need for an exam. After all, why would we waste assessment resources, which apart from economic investments means time from many people, including the candidate who instead of preparing for an exam might better spend that time learning from clinical practice, on candidates who have already given us enough evidence that their level of competence is above the standard. So the other 3 models here yield 90% confidence intervals that are completely above 10, which leads to the same conclusion. Well, and although these 4 models yield somewhat different results, I cannot think of any possible theoretical or practical case in which one model would say progress and another model would say repeat the year without an exam. Next, candidate number 2. This candidate has repeatedly demonstrated that, well, the level is still considerably, well, at best at, but usually below the desired standard. No, I mean, it's repeated demonstrated performance that is considerably below that what we saw also from candidate 1. And when we apply the 4 models to this second candidate, we see that band B yields an interval, in this case completely below 0.5, which means that we can conclude sufficient evidence for the assumption that this candidate's level is below the standard. Well, of the other 3 models, only the period linear model, which tends to result in the widest confidence interval, might give the candidate the benefit of the doubt, and in this sequential setup allow the candidate to participate in the exam. However, even in the case of such a liberal decision in the sequential setup, we would not ignore the track record of this candidate, but rather update the model of this candidate's track record, including the new performance coming from the exam. In a strict program in which the board wants to put a lot of weight on minimizing the possibility of a not yet competent candidate entering the workforce and does not want to allocate assessment resources to candidates who, based on their performance thus far, appear not ready yet to progress, well, the first 3 models could easily be used as support for the decision to provide this candidate with a repeat year, which is to be focused on remediation. Finally, candidate 3, here we will almost surely do well to invest resources in the form of an exam, because this candidate demonstrates a trajectory of performance that fluctuates in a range around the standard. And indeed, when we apply the 4 models to this candidate, we see a 95% credible interval for band B that includes 0.5, and each of the other 3 models returns a 90% confidence interval that includes 10. So for this candidate, we are clear. It is time to prepare for an exam. Again, in the spirit of the longitudinal sequential single case design setup, we would not ignore the track record of this candidate going into the exam, but instead update our model with the new performance coming from the exam, which will result in narrower credible and confidence intervals, hopefully gradually moving away from 10 in either direction. Of course, for the candidate, hopefully in the direction towards higher scores, to make, in any case, a more informed decision about this candidate's current level and the possible progression to the next level. So here we have a summary of more conservative and more liberal decisions per candidate based on the set of 4 models, and we see that for 2 of the 3 candidates the decision is fairly easy. And for the case where conservative and liberal result in different decisions, well, it will come down to the program board motivating how and why it has come to its final decision. To add in this context, also note that this example shows just one isolated line of assessment, whereas in many multi-year programs in medicine, nursing, psychology, pharmacy, etc., there are multiple assessment topics or lines. And there is often a pattern of moderate positive intercorrelation between different types of assessments, making it easier to find support for a progress or not progress decision for an individual candidate. Finally, although this example focuses on individual assessments, this methodology of sequential assessment using single case designs can also be applied to team performance. I will not get into this topic in more detail in this video, but may expand on this in a video in the near future. Okay, that's it for this video. I hope you find this useful, and if you have any ideas or suggestions for future videos, feel free to leave a comment below this video or contact me via the email address shared in the description below this video. Thank you for listening, and see you soon.